Arjun Malhotra and Jessica Walsh never should have met. One chasing a dream, the other running from debt. But when their worlds collided in a fake marriage built on lies, desperation turned to betrayal, and love's illusion ended in murder. The Crime Scene presents a new page of crime, a new mystery, a new shock case. Arjun Malhotra arrived in Toronto in August 2019, carrying nothing but a suitcase, a student visa, and the weight of his family's dreams. He was just 24, the pride of his small village in Punjab, the first in his bloodline to ever go abroad. His parents had sold a chunk of their ancestral land and taken loans to fund his studies, believing this would be their ticket out of poverty. They saw Canada as paradise, a place where their son would earn a degree, land a good job, and send money back home. But the dream cracked fast. The college in Brampton that promised opportunity was mostly a business, taking in international students by the hundreds with barely any support. Rent was high, the cold was brutal, and part-time jobs were scarce. Every interview ended with the same line: "Sorry, we already hired someone." Arjun found himself sharing a small basement with 3 other students, surviving on instant noodles and black coffee, skipping meals to stretch his savings. Calls home were painful. His mother's voice carried pride, his father's carried expectation, and Arjun responded with lies, pretending everything was fine. But inside, he was falling apart. When the tuition deadline approached, he realized he didn't have enough money to pay. He tried everything: borrowing from friends, selling his phone, working night shifts for cash under the table, but it barely made a dent. The stress ate at him. Sleep was rare, anxiety constant. He began to fear the one thing every international student dreads: deportation. His student visa was hanging by a thread, and with each passing week, his options disappeared. Then one night, while sitting in a cheap diner with other struggling students, he heard about a dangerous shortcut: marrying a Canadian citizen for permanent residency. Illegal, risky, but tempting. A deal that could change his fate or destroy it. Jessica Walsh entered Arjun Malhotra's life like an answer to a desperate prayer wrapped in danger. She was 29, a single mother from Mississauga drowning in overdue bills, maxed out credit cards, and rent she could barely afford. Her life had spiraled after losing her job, and with no family support except her sister Megan, she was running on fumes. So when a mutual contact from an underground network approached her about helping an international student stay in Canada in exchange for money, she didn't think twice. $20,000 spread over a few months felt like salvation. Arjun met her in a dimly lit Brampton cafe, both nervous but pretending it was business as usual. Jessica had a confident smile masking her fear. Arjun had trembling hands hiding his guilt. They rehearsed a love story for the immigration officers: how they met at a cultural event, how he made her laugh, how love crossed borders. They took photos in parks, held hands awkwardly in public, and even posted a few couple selfies on Facebook to make it look real. Within a month, they had a quick civil ceremony at City Hall, signed the papers, and became husband and wife on paper. Behind the smiles, there was nothing but a transaction. Jessica went back to her apartment, and Arjun to his basement room, their communication limited to scheduled messages about upcoming immigration checks and monthly payments. For 6 months, the system worked. Arjun paid regularly. Jessica played her role when needed, and both pretended they'd beaten the system. But then cracks appeared. Arjun's payments got delayed after losing one of his warehouse jobs. Jessica started texting more aggressively, hinting that she could expose him if he didn't pay up. What started as a lifeline began to feel like a ticking bomb. Neither of them realized that this fake marriage, built on lies and fear, was about to spiral into something deadly real. By the summer of 2020, the tension between Arjun and Jessica had turned toxic, their arrangement unraveling faster than either expected. Jessica, already juggling her bills and her son Ethan's needs, was furious that Arjun's payments had stopped coming. The promised $20,000 had barely reached halfway, and she felt cheated. Arjun tried to explain that his hours at the warehouse were cut due to the pandemic, but Jessica didn't care. She needed money, and she wanted it now. The texts grew harsher, the calls more threatening. "If you don't pay me this week, I'll tell immigration everything," she hissed one night over the phone. Arjun felt his chest tighten. Deportation meant shame, ruin, and the end of everything he'd sacrificed for. He begged for time, promising he'd pay soon, but Jessica had reached her breaking point. She started posting cryptic messages online, hinting at liars who marry for papers, making Arjun paranoid that she was setting him up. He began avoiding her, terrified of being caught, until one day she showed up at his basement door unannounced, demanding the rest of the money. The confrontation turned ugly. Voices echoed through the hallway as neighbors peeked out, watching a furious woman curse in the cold night while a desperate man begged her to leave. She stormed off, slamming the door, swearing that he'd regret this. That night, Arjun couldn't sleep. Fear and guilt gnawed at him like acid. Every sound outside made him jump. Every message notification made his heart race. The lie that once promised him a future was now destroying his sanity. And in a twist of cruel irony, he started feeling trapped in a marriage that wasn't even real. The next morning, Jessica filed an anonymous tip with Immigration Canada, setting off a chain reaction that would soon turn their fake love story into a deadly cat-and-mouse game. The knock on Arjun's door came just after dawn, sharp and unnerving, followed by the echoing voices of two immigration officers asking for Mr. Malhotra. His heart nearly stopped as he opened the door, sweat prickling his skin despite the chill. They stepped inside, polite but firm, asking questions that sliced through every lie he had rehearsed. How long had he known Jessica? Where did they live together? Who paid the rent? And why were there no photos of them at family events? Arjun stumbled through his answers, his voice cracking as he tried to sound natural, but the officers' faces remained cold, unreadable. They handed him a notice for a marriage fraud investigation and left, their footsteps fading like a countdown to ruin. Within hours, Arjun called Jessica in panic, his voice shaking, begging her to fix what she started, but she refused, her tone cold and bitter. "You brought this on yourself," she said before hanging up. The betrayal burned. The woman who once posed as his wife was now his biggest threat. He stopped going to classes, stopped eating, stopped talking to his roommates. Every passing day felt like a noose tightening around his neck. He even considered fleeing Canada altogether, but he had no money and nowhere to go. One night, after hours of pacing and paranoia, he decided to confront Jessica in person. He drove to her apartment, rain pouring over the windshield like a curtain of guilt. She opened the door, startled to see him drenched and trembling, his eyes wild with desperation. Their argument exploded instantly, accusations, shouting, and threats filling the small space. Jessica told him she had already met with an immigration officer and handed over proof, including fake text messages and photos. Arjun felt his world collapse in silence. That night, something inside him snapped, something dark, irreversible, and dangerous. Arjun sat in his car outside Jessica's apartment long after midnight, drenched in rain and regret, his mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and humiliation. Every breath felt heavy, every thought replayed her words. "I've already told them everything." His dreams of staying in Canada were gone, his reputation shattered, and his family's sacrifice turned to dust. The betrayal consumed him, festering like poison. He imagined his parents' faces when they'd find out their son was being deported for fraud, the whispers in the village, the shame he could never outrun. He tried reasoning with himself, telling his heart to let it go, but the fury inside him was uncontrollable. The next morning, Jessica continued her threats, texting him about more evidence she planned to hand over unless he paid her another $10,000. It was the final push over the edge. Arjun stopped replying. Instead, he started watching her, following her routine, learning her patterns, where she dropped her son off, when she came home, what nights she was alone. He convinced himself it wasn't revenge, just justice, a punishment for betrayal. His friends noticed his silence, his eyes darker than before, his laughter gone. One evening, he bought a cheap kitchen knife from a dollar store and kept it in his car, staring at it every night like it held all his answers. Guilt battled with rage, but rage kept winning. On October 3rd, 2020, he drove to Jessica's apartment again, his pulse thundering in his ears. She opened the door halfway, startled to see him, and before she could speak, he forced his way inside. Words flew like daggers, accusations, tears, and screaming, until one moment of blind fury took control. By the time the neighbors heard the noise and called the police, The apartment had fallen silent. Jessica lay lifeless, and Arjun's trembling hands were covered in the consequences of everything he'd lost. The sirens shattered the quiet suburban street as flashing red and blue lights painted the wet pavement outside Jessica Walsh's apartment. Neighbors gathered behind yellow tape, whispering in disbelief as officers carried out a blood-stained knife sealed in evidence. Inside, Jessica's body lay still on the floor, her phone buzzing unanswered beside her, a text from her sister Megan glowing on the screen. "Are you okay? You didn't call." Arjun Malhotra was nowhere to be found. Within hours, his photo circulated across local news and social media. Indian student wanted in connection with Mississauga woman's murder. The same young man once seen as polite and hardworking was now labeled a fugitive. Arjun drove aimlessly through the city that no longer felt like home, the radio murmuring his own name in news bulletins. His hands shook on the steering wheel as guilt and panic strangled his breath. He didn't plan to kill her, he told himself over and over. It just happened. But even that lie couldn't silence the truth in his blood-stained clothes. He abandoned the car near an industrial area in Brampton and fled on foot, surviving on gas station snacks and sleepless nights in motels. Meanwhile, detectives pieced the story together: immigration fraud, money disputes, threats, and a marriage built on deception. Megan, heartbroken and furious, sat through hours of questioning, revealing Jessica's fear and regret in the days before her death. The media devoured the case, painting it as a tragic collision of desperation and deceit. A week later, Arjun was spotted at a bus terminal in Windsor, trying to cross into Detroit using a fake ID. He didn't resist when police surrounded him. He just stood there, eyes hollow, whispering, "I didn't mean to." As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his Canadian dream ended exactly where it began, in cold silence and hopelessness. Arjun Malhotra's trial began in the fall of 2021, a media spectacle that gripped both Canada and India, transforming a story of immigration dreams into a haunting cautionary tale. The courtroom buzzed with tension as prosecutors painted Arjun as a cold-blooded killer who murdered Jessica Walsh in revenge after she exposed their fraudulent marriage. They presented text messages, voice recordings, and the final heated confrontation as proof of premeditation. The defense, however, argued that Arjun had been pushed to the brink, financially broken, emotionally cornered, and betrayed by the system that promised him a better life. They called it a crime of passion, not of intent. Jessica's sister Megan attended every hearing, her eyes hollow yet burning with grief as she watched the man who took her sister's life sit motionless in the defendant's chair. When Megan testified about Jessica's fear and the night she died, the courtroom fell silent, the weight of her words suffocating. Arjun, in his statement, broke down, sobbing that he never wanted to hurt Jessica, that he only wanted her to stop threatening him. But his tears couldn't undo what was done. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence: life in prison with no chance of parole for 15 years. As the judge read the verdict, Arjun closed his eyes, feeling the last thread of his old life snap. His parents in India wept during a video call, unable to believe their son's downfall. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the wind carried whispers of judgment. In his prison cell that night, Arjun stared at the ceiling, haunted by everything he'd lost, realizing too late that the price of his fake marriage had been his soul. Years passed, and the world slowly moved on from the sensational case that once filled every headline. But inside the cold gray walls of Millhaven Institution, time stood still for Arjun Malhotra. Each morning felt identical: the clang of metal doors, the shuffling of inmates, the heavy silence that followed him everywhere. He had become a ghost of the man who once arrived in Canada with bright eyes and impossible dreams. Guilt clung to him like a shadow. Every night, he replayed that final moment in Jessica's apartment, her terrified eyes, the sound that ended it all. Letters from home grew fewer, then stopped completely, his parents too ashamed to face the whispers that followed them in their village. News eventually reached him that his father had died of a heart attack, and his mother had moved to live with relatives, her health failing. The weight of that loss broke something inside him for good. Yet, amid the darkness, he began to change. Prison counselors urged him to write, to confront the truth instead of running from it. He started keeping a journal, page after page of confessions, remorse, and reflections about greed, desperation, and the illusion of easy escape. His words turned into a story that some inmates read quietly, moved by its brutal honesty. Years later, a journalist discovered his writings and published excerpts under the title The Price of Paper Dreams, sparking conversations about the exploitation of international students and the cracks in the immigration system. From his cell, Arjun never saw freedom again, but he became a reluctant symbol of a broken system and a tragic reminder of how far desperation can drive a person. In the end, he realized that Jessica wasn't just his victim. She was another soul crushed by the same unforgiving world they both tried to survive.